and welcome to Libertarian Counterpoint. I am your host, James Just, and with me today is author John Cameron. He is author of Rewire, Rekill, and upcoming book,
Aristocracy.
Aristocracy. I was going to say
spelled S-E-A.
I was going to say it wrong, so thank you, John.
Yeah.
And we may or may not get Richard back here in a minute. We've been having some technical difficulties. So if Richard gets back with us, we will have Richard Fields will be with us in the studio or joining us here from remotely. And if not, you've just get me and John today. So John, Social Security and Medicare are broke by any honest accounting standards. But yet our politicians and, many of our fellow citizens just kind of have their head in the sand. Or am I, wrong on this? But
yes, you're wrong. It's perfect.
I would love to be wrong, John. Trust me. I would love to be wrong.
Well, we can go on and on and on about Social Security and Medicare, but, the problem is that on the Social Security side, we're paying people way too much money. There are people, I'm sure you know people, some of your neighbors who have two public pensions, 401ks or IRAs that used to be 401ks, and are collecting basically max Social Security. In England, everybody gets the same amount of the public pension, and it works out to, I think, maybe $1,000 a month, $1,100, $1,200 a month. So England, the great socialist state with the welfare net, understands that you can't just pay everybody everything all the time, and there are very few countries that have the kind of largesse that we have, and on the Medicare side, there's no motivation for anybody to spend money wisely because the government just keeps writing checks. And so those two things combined with the fact that people live way longer and there are fewer young people working to pay Social Security taxes means that, in essence, the thing's broke. You're going to run out of money way before they say they are. And there's really no one has the courage to tell people that. George Bush, of all people, brought it up, second one, not George Herbert Walker, George W. And it didn't kill him, but then the fact that the Twin Towers fell down, probably propped him up. But it's just you're going to have to start rationing care. You're going to have to start reducing payments, and you have people now who've put that largesse into their budget and will not be able to live without making some pretty drastic reductions in lifestyle. And I think some brave politicians are going to have to say, look, folks, we've got to start cutting Social Security benefits. We've got to increase the date at which you can retire, because it was originally, I think, 65 for full benefits, and very few people lived to be 70. Now it's 67, and lots of people are going to live to be 90. So the math just doesn't work out. And I'll shut up so you can talk about it for a while.
Oh yeah, math. Me and math is, but we've created the moral hazard, right?
The monster.
We have created a serious moral hazard where we've set a bunch of people on the promise that this thing will be there, that there will be comfort later on in life, when we know that it can't be true. Because even the people who are existing here today, unless you've taken care of yourself, your Medicare your Social Security doesn't actually pay that much for you to survive. You can't live in California on Social Security or Medicare.
Well, you can if you own your home outright and you have no other debt. But that's very few people.
But that's taking care of yourself, right? You've set yourself up so you can live dirt cheap later on in life. And so unless you've done that, and here in California, and our politicians, they want you to buy and sell your houses all the time. They don't want you to have your house as a homestead, right? Because that's what you're saying. You buy your house and you create your homestead, and that homestead is there for you, so you and future generations don't have to struggle so much to buy the house, to get on the the bottom rungs of the economic ladder. That was the point of a homestead. And now houses are short-term economic policies, right? That's kind of what the government and our policymakers want.
Well, in California.
Yeah.
And then again, it's scarcity in California. There's many places in the country where Missouri, Mississippi, Oklahoma, not in the big cities, because the big cities turn liberal and prevent you from building houses. But in a lot of middle America, even in not Sacramento, but even in the Central Valley and up in Redding, and I'm not saying affordable compared to the rest of the country, but there's still relatively affordable housing. I mean, Bakersfield and Fresno, not as cheap as it used to be. People can afford to live, but if once you move to the coast, they're major metropolitan areas, because there's a scarcity of housing, then people can't afford to live in the average home. But in much of the country you can. In much of the country they have plenty of room to build houses, because they don't have the crazy rules we do here. They don't have prevailing wage laws, which means that the costs of labor are much cheaper. You can actually get a home insured because the government, unlike the state of California, actually thins forests before they burn down. So on and on and on. We have in the state of California put up all these barriers to people living on a reasonable amount of money, and we're kind of going sideways on it. So I don't know.
Well, no,
But
actually,
anyway,
that brings up a good point, right? Because here in California, what was it recently? State Farm said they're not going to write any more insurance policies here, because now they gave a bunch of laundry excuses, the climate and the disasters.
Well, no, the articles mentioned climate change, but I don't believe State Farm mentioned climate change. They talked about fire, and they talked about the cost of that, and they talked about the costs of rebuilding homes. And the fire is not because of climate change, but because of our government's folly, because privately managed forests in the state of California do not burn down nearly to the extent as publicly managed forests, because these clowns, and they're basically eco-terrorists, prevent people from thinning forests out. It has nothing to do with climate change. A few degrees higher isn't what's causing these fires. What's causing these fires is lunatics being let to stop good forestry practice. And then if you have to pay prevailing wage, which is union wages, to rebuild a house, the costs are through the roof. But the news articles talk about climate change. And I'm sure State Farm had to pay lip service to climate change, so they mentioned it. But that's not really the driver. The driver is horrible policies in the state of California.
That makes it just impossibly expensive to have insurance policies, or possibly expensive, just to own and operate an insurance, just fill out the paperwork. It's just insane. And State Farm is just the tip of the iceberg. We're going to start losing more. And of course, the solution will be they'll create government insurance, right? And so that's gonna work well.
As good as the paper it's printed on.
Hey, talk about printing paper. The debt ceiling bill, John. The debt ceiling bill passed in the House, and it's now on to the Senate. Where now I didn't read the details of this, so I heard some part where they've essentially suspended the debt limit deal until 2025.
No, they've this debt. By law, they have to actually officially raise give the government permission to raise even more debt, to raise the debt even higher. And so this takes it through 2024. And it's basically a shell game. What they've done is allowed the government to put into place the exorbitantly high spending levels of the last couple of years with a slight increase. But even taking that all into account, and the fact that it's all smoke and mirrors and gaslighting on both sides, a huge amount of money is going to get printed. But it's less money than would have gotten printed if they didn't do this. And it's also made people start thinking a little bit about maybe the government maybe the government's not spending money wisely, and maybe it could spend a little bit less. Now, a recent poll indicated that 60% of people were in favor of cutting government spending. And considering that probably 80% of people in the country get some kind of check from the government, that's crazy. The problem is having people support which things they want to be spending less on. If the Republicans were serious about it, what they would do is say, okay, we need to roll up our sleeves, we need to cut social programs, and we're going to put military spending on the table. Boom, here it is. It's tiny, it's discretionary. There's only about $600 billion a year. Oh, by the way, the next 5 biggest countries in the world don't spend as much on defense as our single country does. But there is so much waste in military spending and all government spending, really. I mean, you put that on the table and say, okay, we will find a way to do with 10% less. Let's go ahead and look at social programs and find a way to deliver the same product for 10% less.
Oh, they could easily find 10%, but you'd have to change the budgeting process, and they're not going to do that.
Well,
and so
so what they're going to do is kick the can down the road until the whole thing explodes, either through hyperinflation like Zimbabwe, or financial collapse, in which case the strong armed government will take over to fix things and make it even worse and worse and worse and worse until there's outright revolution.
Yeah, until you end up with Zimbabwe, right?
Which I am not fomenting revolution, FBI. I didn't even suggest it. I'm just saying history indicates that will happen.
That's what is going to happen. Because at some point, the service for this debt becomes unaffordable, right? Because you have to pay. Pretty
much is now. Service on that $31 trillion is as much as we spend on the military. And again, we spend more on the military than, I think it's the next 5 or 6 or maybe even 10 countries combined after us. And that includes China. And they're spending a lot of money on the military. So if you put China and Russia and the UK and all the rest, we spend more money than them.
Yeah.
I don't have the number there, but it's a huge amount of money. And anybody that's ever been in the military knows that a lot of that money is just flushed down like toilette.
Well, a lot of money that the government spends is flushed down.
Yes, intentionally.
Yeah, it's pretty terrible. But maybe there is some hope kind of floating around out there.
Not here, but out
there.
there.
Around in the world, right? There's a libertarian, now if I can pronounce
Javier
Milei.
Yeah.
Next has an opportunity to become the next president of Argentina, which is kind of a surprise, right? Because Argentina has this nasty habit of going to socialists and then kind of this hard right wing.
Socialist, hard right, socialist.
Yeah, they bounce.
Socialist with hard right who are socialists. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of Argentina has this long history of kind of being in love with powerful governments, but yet, maybe are they done with the swinging and looking for a different way, John?
Well, what's interesting is that I think Richard, who wanted to be here with us this evening, but the power of the internet or the lack of the power of the internet, he was here for a while. Took it down and forwarded this. It's an ABC News article, and despite the fact that the guy calls himself a libertarian and promotes libertarian policies and teaches economics as a libertarian, what ABC News did, of course, was compare him to Trump because of his popularity. And Trump is about as far from a libertarian as Trump's a big boy. You couldn't throw him as far as he's away from a libertarian. So they're just comparing him to Trump because he's a populist. He's popular. And, the fact that Barack Obama was a populist and popular is a good thing. But if it's a conservative or a libertarian, you paint them with that brush that they called him a conservative. And he's libertarian. He's a libertarian.
There's a vast difference between a conservative and a libertarian. The news media wants to pretend there's not.
A libertarian is a classic liberal. And classic liberals are gone, and the self-labeled liberals now are basically socialists. So, what the heck? But he's polling well. People are excited, and unlike in our country, I don't think they're as attached to their teams as we are, because people here, you can't pry a Democrat away from being a Democrat with a crowbar, and the same thing for a Republican, despite the fact that there's really no difference between the parties in 90% of the respects now. Try something new. And as you pointed out, the socialist, when a needle goes over the socialist side, it doesn't work in Argentina. When it goes to the Nazi side, it doesn't work in Argentina. And that swinging of the needle, somewhere maybe it'll line up libertarian, and that would be a wonderful thing.
Maybe it's time to break the gauge.
Yeah.
I think one of these things we're going to talk here about in a minute is, how that gauge, the left-right gauge, is essentially meaningless. We'll skip down here for a second. So the left-right spectrum is mostly meaningless, as there was a Reason article that pointed out that, and the reason is, as we've discussed, is because there's not that much difference when you get down to policy. There's only like 3 or 4 issues where there's a real standard difference. Both left and right love the power of the government. They just want to be in control of it.
Yeah,
and
they love people not telling them what to do, as long as they can tell other people what to do. And they love spending money, and they love spending more money than they're bringing in through taxes, and both sides do it. So the idea that now the left used to be the home of free speech. Now supposedly the right is the home of free speech, and the left doesn't want free speech because what the right are calling free speech is bad speech, and the left doesn't want bad speech. The left were the bastion of taking away personal rights, but they're now, because of Roe v. Wade getting overturned, now the right of person is paramount importance, but the right of property is not. So how you can line people up left and right under the old standards is I don't know how you do it. When you have hardcore people who are called conservatives now being the only ones that are fighting to protect the Second Amendment, and the ACLU is basically not fighting to protect it. It's a crazy world we live in. So I don't think we can label people left and right. I think you have to talk to people about issues, which the government doesn't ever, the politicians never really want to do. They just want you to rah-rah for their team and ignore what their team stands for.
Yeah, because I think maybe one of the reasons we're so divisive and so divided in the country these days is because there's so few things they're actually arguing over. Because they're really only arguing over a handful of issues, and so those handful of issues become more and more
and those are
extreme,
surface issues, shiny objects, and they're important to some people, and they're important to, for a reason. But most of the issues that they're fighting over are really designed to keep the populace from looking at the important issues, like that basically the country's bankrupt, we're going to run out of money for Social Security and Medicare, our schools are broken, and they're primarily broken because people don't have a choice, they're bound by the zip code they live in, and public employee teachers unions in the states where they're powerful are much more concerned with their retirement and their medical care than they are with the good of the students. So the people in power don't want us looking at the important issues. They want us to be focused on a war between two really kind of corrupt states in Eastern Europe. They want us to be scared about China. They want us to be really upset because people don't have personal freedom to self-name, and call themselves and dress however they want and all the rest of that. I'm not saying that's unimportant stuff. To people, it's important to them. It's important to them. But the really important underpinnings of freedom. We talked about we'll talk about the FBI in the next show next week.
Yeah, but the reason these things are important.
Those things are supremely important because without a rule of law, nothing else can happen. Without a sound economy, nothing else can happen. But they're using shiny objects to distract us from this. And when it comes right down to it, this whole big fight over the debt ceiling was really just a con and a shell game.
Yeah. Well, when you're afraid and angry, you do two things. One, you don't think, and two, you write more checks. And so that's why they want you.
And you will let someone who promises to protect you, so you don't need to be fearful, do things that might be a little suspect.
Yeah.
And that's what's happened, especially the last couple of 3 years.
And that's what you should actually be most afraid of, right?
Yeah.
Is people
The
who
savior.
tell you, yeah,
I'm your savior.
Let
me just take away all your rights for 2 years, and I'll save you.
oh yeah, I'm going to take all your freedoms away to protect your freedoms. Which actually brings us to an interesting question, because Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has announced his run for president, and he's got this mixed bag with libertarians. We've got this handful of libertarians who kind of like him for some reasons.
Why?
And I'm not quite sure. I haven't sure. And then you've got these others who despise him because he has an authoritarian bent, and it's kind of clear that he's got an authoritarian bent.
Well, it's kind of clear he's a lunatic too. But is he more of a lunatic than the Trumpster, or less competent than someone who, if he was given a competency test, would obviously fail it? I don't know. But he's got some crazy ideas, and the fact that he's a rabid environmentalist scares me the worst, because radical environmentalism should be classed as a religion, and you don't want religious fanatics in power.
Yeah, any kind of religion.
No, it doesn't. If it's the religion of Gaia, or the religion of Catholicism, or the religion of Muslim, or the religion of socialism,
all of those spaghetti monster, the flying spaghetti monster. You don't want someone who's been caught by.
But the fact that some conservatives like him is really scary to me. He's just,
I think conservatives like him because he irritates Democrats, and they're just.
Well, I'm hoping what
I think that's what it is.
Here's what I'm hoping he turns into, but not because I want the quote unquote conservatives to win. I'd like to see some libertarian leaning person become a president, and I don't know if that's ever going to happen in my lifetime or many more lifetimes, but I think that the conservatives are going to fund Robert Kennedy as a Democrat, just like the Democrats funded the most Looney Tunes of the quote-unquote conservative, so that the people will lose in the general election. And so, give money to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and have him destroy the Democratic Party and all this nonsense, and then some Republican can get elected. So he's got the name. He plays to people's fears. But that whole, for some reason the Kennedy family is held up as these paragons of virtue and light, and we yearn for the good old days of the Kennedys, and what a corrupt bunch of lunatics that family was. And so now they're saints. I mean,
yeah, they were always a corrupt family, but because
they were bootleggers.
But because a couple of them were assassinated, we've kind of ignored all of that, all of the indiscretions that the family has participated in over the decades. We'll call it that.
Yeah. So that's the key to having your family indiscretions ignored, is get shot.
Apparently.
Yeah.
Because apparently if your brothers get shot, you can get away with a lot of things.
Huh?
Yeah, clearly. So bringing these up, getting away with things, the left is gaslighting us on San Francisco's problems. They're trying to pretend that San Francisco's problems aren't as bad as we can clearly see they are, and that it's not the fault of who's been in power for the last 20 years, Mr. Gavin Newsom.
When Gavin Newsom promised, here's a man that keeps his promises, folks. He promised to end homelessness in San Francisco when he was mayor 20 years ago. And did he do that, James?
No, I don't think that actually happened. I think homelessness has gotten worse ever since they said that every single year. And not only has it gotten worse, it's gotten more expensive to the taxpayer exponentially. We've watched the growth of the homelessness industrial complex, and it's a difficult thing, right? No one likes to see people on the street. And for those of us who have understood how it happened, we have lots of sympathy for them because I live, a block off Stockton Boulevard, and down the street from my house, they closed a bunch of the, the last chance motels. And well, when you close last chance motels, those people have nowhere else to go. So they're going to be homeless. They're going to be sleeping in their cars. They're going to be sleeping in tents. And so we saw it explode right on Stockton Boulevard. Yeah. And that's just a microcosm of all the policy decisions that have created homelessness over the last 20 years.
Do you remember, you probably don't remember, but it wasn't that long ago that you could rent a room. Basically, these are people on the bottom rung of the social ladder, and they would basically get a room with board or a room without board. And they'd have access to a bathroom. They'd have a safe place to sleep at night that was, warm in the winter and cool enough in the summer and dry. They'd have a place where they could take a shower, and they could get a meal. Room and board. And sometimes you rent a room and you don't have board. You have to find your own food. And then you go to all-you-can-eat buffet like every other day and, do that. And so they closed those. Now, in the most densely populated part of California is Chinatown in San Francisco. And these are basically big boarding houses. But for some reason, they're not closed. They're open. But the ones, the equivalent of it, the bottom rung, and call it a flop house, call it whatever you want, but it's a relatively safe place to sleep at night.
Yeah. I was watching
cheap.
I was watching a documentary on Japan and how Japan you don't see homeless people on the streets in Japan. Yeah. It's not that their people aren't homeless, you just don't see them. And the reason you don't see them is because they spend the night in internet cafes. And you rent a little room, essentially, it's just big enough for you to sleep in, and has a TV.
It's pod.
And yeah, it's got a TV so you can play your video games, so you can use the internet, and so you sleep there every night. It costs a few bucks. And so that's how they solved homelessness. But that's the same thing. You rent a room for a night, but we don't have those anymore. We're not allowed to have those anymore.
And the reason we don't have them is because the homeless industrial complex benefits from having people die of ulcers from dirty needles on the sidewalk outside of somebody's house. And it's disgusting. It serves a purpose to have those people suffer. And all those people here, 90% of them are either drug addicts, alcoholics, or mentally ill, or all of the above. And they just a clean, warm, not even clean, a relatively safe room to sleep at night, place to shower on occasion, place to get a meal. It's all they need until they can get some treatment for the underlying mental health issues that have put them there.
And a lot of times those issues kind of developed after they ended up homeless. If you're kind of functional and you're living at the last chance motel and your last chance motel gets closed down, where are you going to turn? And so you get desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. They get into drugs, they get into alcohol, and then that ends up with a mental health problem when that happens for too long.
And the fact that it wasn't that long ago in California, you could get a job in a factory.
And we are out of time, John. We want to thank you for being here.
Well, thank you very much for having me here, James, as always. It's been a pleasure.
And please remember to love everybody. And good night.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.